Hi, Joe Webby here to talk a little bit about your readings for your Module 9, I think, for the intensive intervention curriculum, with this focus of this module being on the intensive intervention taxonomy. For this module, I chose two readings to supplement the reading by Lynn and colleagues on intensive intervention taxonomy. The first reading is an article by Gerald August and colleagues that talks a little bit about adaptive interventions and how they might apply and be put in place to be implemented in community settings. In our case, community meaning classrooms. And then the second reading I have is a grant that was recently funded by IES. It's a Goal 2 grant with Lee Kern that is focused on developing an adaptive framework for taking standard protocols of Tier 2 interventions and coming up with a set of decision rules to help teachers that make those adaptations to fit the needs of kids who are non-responsive in their classrooms. So for the grant, I just want you to actually read the grant and sort of see how we put together our set of research activities and how that might actually fit into a your sort of mindset about what it might look like to put together a grant around adaptation and intensification of interventions. For the August article, though, I want you to pay attention to a few things that I think are important as they relate to adaptation and intensification. So the first thing I want you to think about is one, is adaptation and intensification the same thing? Do those things fit hand in hand in terms of when we think about a database decision making model and DBI, the DBI process? Is adaptation really the same thing, or is that something a little bit different? Secondly, in that particular article, August and colleagues make a distinction between adapted and adaptive frameworks. And so think about those two things and what they mean, and are they the same thing, or are they really different? Third, in that article, August provides a conceptual framework that talks about the adaptive process, and in that process talks about how we think about making changes in a protocol, yet preserving the core principles of that particular intervention. So my question for you, or my questions around that particular issue, are: can we actually do those two things? Can we identify core principles of evidence-based practice that we know that we can't change? And how do we do that? And is that a set of work that needs to be done to first find out what pieces of a particular intervention are the most important? And second, where do we identify those parts that are not core but are adaptable, where changes can be made to meet the needs of a kid who's non-responsive, or for someone who might actually need something a little bit more? And also related to that particular question is the adaptation of an evidence-based practice a deterrent to creating an evidence base for that particular intervention, or is it a better way to sort of to expand the evidence base? What I mean here is that whether or not I replicate an intervention which is slightly different based on an adaptation, is that adding something to the literature base, or is it really creating a new set of evidence-based practices that need to be studied in a much more intensive sort of way? The last thing I actually want you to think about in this particular article would be August talks about the need for preference-based adaptations and needs-based adaptations. Now, from my perspective, the needs-based adaptation is what we were talking about throughout the process of this grant. Looking at children who are non-responsive and making changes through intensification or adaptation to a standard protocol to make it much more effective. But what I want you to also think about is, what does preference play in that role? And by preference, I mean, is it important for us to consider adaptations that actually might create changes in a standard protocol, not so much in what the kid or child needs, but also, more importantly, perhaps more importantly, what the teacher prefers in terms of how they teach, with how they run their classroom, what kind of style they like in terms of in my case, behavior management, and is that a separate type of process? And so when we think about adaptation, which of the parties are we involving? Are we just focused on the child? And if we just focus on the child, are we really then creating a set of new or better or more tailored interventions that may just sit on the shelf because they don't fit a particular teacher's way of thinking? So is preference important in this adaptation or intensification process? And if so, how does that adaptation based on preference look different than the adaptation based on need? So those are my questions, and I hope that you enjoy those readings. I enjoyed picking them, and I look forward to hearing more conversations about your thoughts around these two pieces of reading. All right, thanks, and good luck. Bye.